So, hi and welcome to everybody, and thank you all so much for making the decision to attend this webinar today, because we know how busy everybody is. I know in Ireland the schools are back. In the UK, I believe it's next week. For those of you who are listening around the world, you may already be in your term time, or you may just be about to start as well, depending on your school year. And whether you're listening live or to the recording, you are all so welcome. And we actually have people from all over the world today tuning in. We've got obviously UK, Ireland, even Dubai, Australia, New Zealand, the States, even Malaysia and Singapore. So we have a truly international audience. It's absolutely fantastic that so many people from around the world are so interested. It's just brilliant. Just before we get going fully on the webinar, you will have an opportunity to ask questions. You can put them into the chat box. However, we will not be answering those until the end of the webinar. So you have an hour now of actual just information. That's all we're going to do. We're just going to give you as much information as we can. If we stop and start with questions, we're not going to get through it all. But what we have decided is that we will spend an extra about 30 minutes after this hour answering questions, Q&A. If you don't have time, don't worry. We're going to put all those questions and answers onto an email. And we will also be talking in that 30 minutes about what you can do next, how you can take this forward. Although I'm sure it's lovely to see us, it's a little bit distracting. So what we're going to do is we're just going to turn our videos off. Fantastic. So before we get fully started in what we're about to tell you, we'd like to actually just get a little feel for our audience and see if any of these apply to you. So again, just using your chat box, perhaps put a yes in if you are already using a form of systematic phonics, some sort of phonics program with your students, whether it's one-to-one or whether it's in your classroom, whatever level you're using it at. It'd be great if we just got a yes to see how many of you. Okay, so some yeses are coming through.
Yeah, lots of yeses.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay. And then the second question is, if you are using a form of systematic phonics, then are you finding that some of the students are still failing to meet expected levels of reading and spelling, despite excellent delivery and everyone's effort all around? We'd like to again see any yeses for people who
oh, it's definitely there. So.
Definite yes. Yeah, the yeses are all coming in, so fantastic. And the last question is, well, then are you looking for something that you can easily add into your toolbox so that you can actually help those struggling students? The yeses are coming in. Well, I would hope so, because basically that's what this is all about. So fantastic. Yeah, we've got the yeses pouring in. Brilliant. So this is what this is all about. It's not about throwing anything out. It's about adding something in. Now, for those of you, some of you have met us before. Some of you have actually been on some of our trainings. You might have been on our live seminars, or you might have just seen us on previous webinars. But for those of you who haven't met us before, if it's okay, we'd like to introduce ourselves and give a little bit of background of who we are and how we ended up here.
So hi everybody, and great that so many people have joined us today. So I'm Paula Monty. I'm a retired school principal, head teacher in the UK, with over 35 years experience in primary education and also adult literacy. Now, as you can imagine, I've either used or come across pretty much every scheme, approach and program that's been introduced since the 1980s. I've always had a passion to help children who are struggling. You know, I was, as a class teacher and a head teacher, I was always searching for answers. I got good results, and my last school was judged outstanding and was known as a dyslexia-friendly school. And I was actually known as a head who would be prepared to try anything, even, you know, many things really out of the box that might make a difference. But still, there were some bright children who were struggling with the basic skills. Actually, it wasn't until after I'd retired and I met a wonderful lady called Olive Hickmott, who told me about the process that she had developed. And after that, well, Olive put me in touch with Sarah, and Sarah and I have been working over the last about 7 years to really understand how this process works, and also to help Olive develop courses for educators. And this is the process we are delighted to be sharing with you today. So I'm now no longer retired, and I'm devoting my later years to help spread the word that there is something out there that can make a profound difference to children's learning. I just wish I'd known about it when I was a classroom teacher and a head teacher. So I now work as a learning coach and trainer. I'm based in the UK, trained staff in over 30 schools, run courses at the Helen Arkell Dyslexia Centre, and I see private clients, some of whom have been referred to me by the Dyslexia Research Trust. So I'm just so excited to be talking with you today, and I can't wait to share our work with you.
Thanks, Paula. So my name is Sarah Haboubi, and my most important job is actually that I'm a mum of 2 boys. One is still in primary, and the other one has only just started secondary school. So we've had a really big step this week with him starting into secondary. And so I've actually been through both boys, although they went to different primary schools, both schools use the phonics, synthetic phonics programs. And actually both boys struggled. But in particular, it was actually my older son who struggled the most with it, because little did we know he actually had hearing impairment due to fluid in his ears. He had, a lot of children would actually have at a young age of glue ear. So I know that the phonics program with the sound, the auditory base of it, was really, really difficult for him. And he would stand next to the TV with the TV full volume. It was only until eventually we kind of realized actually this wasn't selective hearing. It was actually a problem. But at that point, he'd been in school for over a year, really, really struggling with the sound side of it. And I was so, so lucky, because at that time I actually met Olive. She introduced me to the process, and I was able to use it with him. So I've actually seen it firsthand as a mum. But I do have a job as well. I do work outside the home. I am a coach and a trainer. And for over 16 years, my passion has really been working with students of all ages to unlock their learning potential. And at the time, just before I met Olive, I was actually working at a secondary school with exam level students. And actually throughout the time at that school, I got younger and younger students, and I got first and second year students. And I had about 40 students who were all really, really struggling. And my remit was help them with their literacy and numeracy. So I was a bit confused, because obviously they'd been at primary school for 8 years previous to this. And it was only when I actually saw their educational psychological reports that I actually saw that most of them had dyslexia. And my big question was then, okay, what is it I don't know that if I knew, I could actually help them to improve their learning strategies? Because I do believe, and as does Paula, that everybody can learn. We just have to find the right approach. And it was actually at that time that I met Olive. I heard her speak. She introduced me to Paula. We clicked. And for the last 7 years, we've been working really, really hard to really fully understand this process. How does it actually work? And then how can we translate that into not just one-to-one sessions, but actually across the whole class? And around the same time, I actually also decided to go back to college, and I did a master's. And I used this research, this process, as the basis of my research with adults, with the theory that if adults in their 50s who were struggling all their lives could actually improve their spelling and reading with this process, then it would definitely work for 4 and 5-year-olds who are just at the beginning of their school career. And we had amazing, amazing results. Within 4 weeks, these adults who had never been able to spell really their entire lives were able to spell. So they knew the process, and it changed not only their spelling and their reading, but also their confidence. And I know one of my students in particular, one of my research volunteers, he also came off antidepressants. I mean, it was really quite an impressive result. And I was very, very humbled with the process. I was also very, very lucky to have met a very open-minded, really kind of adventurous principal of a primary school. And we ran a pilot project at his school in 2013. And they have been using it ever since across the entire school. But we're going to talk a little bit about that later. So I am a learning coach as well. That's my main job. I'm a trainer. I train in schools. I train open courses. And I've also been speaking internationally on this subject. So in Dubai, in Australia, a couple of years ago at a big conference, we were invited to present on this. So although I'm based in Ireland, I am actually international, really, because I'm always happy to travel for work and to talk to people about this. So we hope that that's given you a little bit of background of who we are and how we got here. Before we get going about the full content of the webinar, we just want to really emphasize what we're not saying. So we're not going to be saying this. We're not going to be saying that you will need lots of new and expensive resources. So I hope that that's a relief to a lot of you. We're also not going to say that this is a magic bullet that's going to work for absolutely every single child, because that just doesn't exist. There is no one system that's going to work for absolutely everybody. But we do see it working for many, many children who've been struggling. We're not saying that this is an alternative to phonics. And we're not saying that you have to get rid of your existing phonics programs. So basically, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. So on this webinar, what are you going to get? So you're going to discover why phonics isn't the complete solution for all students and what's the missing link. We're going to give you some neuroscience behind learning. And the reason we do that is because we want to explain the critical role that mental imagery plays in spelling and reading. And this comes from lots of research that's come out in recent years in neuroscience. We're going to explain how we use a strength-based model and a growth mindset, and both of those are really essential components for making any system work. And then we're going to give you an overview of the 5 stages for successful spelling. We're actually going to give you each of those 5 stages. We're going to explain what each stage is and what would actually happen. We're actually going to give you a taste of some of those as well. And then we're going to explain how with this, we've also seen improvements in reading fluency as well. Okay.
Okay, so the reading wars. Yes, I'm sure many of you are aware of the wars that have been raging for many, many years around how we best teach reading. And the battle has really been between 2 distinct camps. You've got, on the one hand, the phonics camp, and on the other hand, you've got the look and say, the whole word approach. Now, each camp is truly believing that their way is the best and most effective for helping children learn how to read. Now, to a great extent, this war is now over. The current research and evidence is indicating that, you know, a systematic, well-structured phonics program, and in fact it is synthetic phonics that's being promoted mostly, these programs are the most effective way to teach reading. But we know, I know, because I introduced that in my school, we went down the synthetic phonics route, but we know at the classroom phase, you know, when we're dealing with children on a daily basis, that it isn't the answer for all students. You know, there's a consistent around about 10–20% of children who are still failing to reach the expected levels of reading. That's mostly from test data in the UK and Ireland, but we also do see it worldwide, and the figures for dyslexia are around about that. Now, it's argued, particularly in the UK at the moment, that synthetic phonics is the only way to teach reading. And they say first, fast, and only. And provided enough instruction is given, it will eventually work for everyone. But we do know that that simply isn't the case. You know, and even Jim Rose in his influential report said success for some children can be elusive, and we don't think that's acceptable, really. Many children are leaving primary without the level of reading that they need to be successful at a secondary level and beyond. So what are we saying about these reading wars? Well, absolutely, we do need really good quality synthetic phonics programs and instruction. And you know, everybody's worked so hard to get to grips with how we effectively teach phonics in school. And we know that, you know, the look and say, the whole word, is used for those, you know, the so-called tricky words, the sight words. And we also know that neither synthetic phonics on its own or look and say whole word really reach all children. And this is the brilliance of Olive Hickmott. She discovered what it is that's happening that makes these not work for all the children. There is a vital missing link. Olive found this missing link, and what the missing link is effective mental imagery skills. Now, we know that the vast majority of good readers and spellers use this skill to see words in their mind's eye without being explicitly taught how to do so. So now for reading, it's absolutely essential in order to move from, you know, that kind of decoding each word, the sounds in each word, to then being able to just recognize that word quickly, you know, the rapid automatic naming. And recent research in neuroscience has shown that we predominantly use our visual center to do this. Eventually, reading becomes very much a visual process. And for spelling, well, it was shown over 30 years ago in a very large modeling project that good spellers actually see the whole word in their mind's eye. And we know from our work with hundreds of students that those who can't spell well actually do not see words clearly in their mind's eye. And so why is it really important to be able to see words in our mind's eye, to have a visual component to the learning process? Well, we look at the English language. Now, English, as you probably will know from your phonics training, is one of the languages which has really deep orthographic depth. So we have 26 letters, and they make 44 sounds. You know, some languages have a very shallow depth, and then, you know, 26 letters would make 26 sounds. Now, it gets even more complicated because we actually have 250 plus graphemes. Now, what is the result of having a purely auditory-based system? Well, the result is that the students get stuck at that stage of trying to spell words phonetically. You know, they make those first attempts, don't they, using their phonics to start to write. And so this approach actually has its limitations. So I remember one child recently said to me, "Oh, but my teacher tells me to sound it out, and then I get it wrong. You know, why do I get it wrong?" She was actually 11 years old, so she should be way beyond that stage of that. Now, she was getting it wrong because she was not able to use her visual skills to learn the right grapheme. She was just relying on the basic sounds. Now, one of the unique characteristics of what we do is to help people understand their own experiences when they're reading, and particularly when they're spelling. And what better place to start than with you? So I'm going to hand you over to Sarah now.
Thanks, Paula. Okay, so to start with, we are actually going to test your spelling. Okay, do you have, what we'd like to make sure is you have a piece of paper and a pen. Okay, so we're going to do this as quickly as possible. Are you ready? No, we're actually not going to give you a test. But if we were going to give you a test, imagine if you were sitting in front of us and we actually did that to you. And we said, okay, we're going to assess your spelling. If that was to actually happen, what would you notice about how you would feel? What would you actually just become aware of what happens inside your body when you know you're going to be assessed? Would you get really, really stressed out, really, really worried? Or perhaps you would be, yeah, come on, bring it on, I want to show off. Or perhaps you're just something in between, of just like, well, whatever happens, happens. It's absolutely fine. And it's quite interesting because once you're at the front of the class, we tend to forget actually what it's like to be sitting in the seat and to be assessed all the time. And this is really, really interesting, and it's very, very important because how we feel makes a huge difference in terms of how we learn. And we're going to get into that in a little bit more detail. But I want you to just remember what it felt when you were in the situation where you were being tested at school. Okay, but we are going to actually ask you to just analyze your own spelling strategies. So I'm going to give you 4 words. I'm just going to say them, and then I'm going to show you the correct spelling. But give it a go. Really try to actually spell these words. Some of them you'll know, and some of them you might not. Okay, so here are the words. So just become aware of what happens inside your mind when you hear the word and then you think of the spelling. The first word is giraffe. The second word is thoroughly. Thoroughly. The third word is zyretic. And yes, it's a real word. I'll tell you what it means in a moment, but it's zyretic. And the fourth word, another real word, promise you, is syzygy. Syzygy. Okay, so how did you do? So those are the spellings. You can check your own spellings and see what happened. Zyretic, by the way, means razor sharp, and syzygy means the alignment of planets, as in a solar eclipse. Okay, so have a little think and just notice what were your spelling strategies. So for example, how do you know how to spell a word that you know really, really well? So I'm going to make an assumption that most of you knew giraffe and thoroughly really well. Although you may have written them down and then thought, oh, actually, that's not right. So when you spell something and then you look at it, how do you know when you've actually spelled a word incorrectly? What are you doing to check? And what about a brand new word? So those last two words, unless you're into astrophysics or Greek origin of words, then perhaps the last two words would have been completely brand new words that you had never seen before, and you just had to basically have a guess. So our question is, would it be possible for you to become a successful speller without using mental imagery? Now, it's very interesting because when we've really looked into the neuroscience behind learning and what actually happens inside the mind. And it's interesting to note that there's no specific reading or spelling center in the brain. Instead, we actually use several areas together as a whole system working together. So we're just going to give you a little bit of background in terms of the neuroscience. So this is basically fMRI scans. And they did MRI scans of fluent readers to notice which parts of the brain lit up. And these three areas were the ones that lit up consistently for those who could read fluently. So the first area is called the Broca's area. This is at the front of the brain. So the left side of the picture is the front of the brain. And this is about articulation and word analysis. So that's in terms of pronunciation. Look at the word and be able to understand, okay, how would you say it? The second region is the parieto-temporal region, and this is about word analysis in terms of what does it mean. So this is the language center in terms of actually understanding language regarding meaning and how do you communicate. And the third center is further to the back of the brain, and it's called the occipital temporal region and often called the word form area. And this is used for rapid automatic fluid identification of words. So that's the rapid automatic naming that we know is what is necessary for fluent reading. So what about when a student is struggling? What happens? So in her book, Overcoming Dyslexia, Sally Shaywitz has these images. And essentially, you can see the one on the left is the same as the one I just showed you previously. So this is the fluent reader, or what they would call a non-impaired brain. And essentially, the fluent readers would access that word form area in less than 150 milliseconds. So that lights up incredibly quickly, less than a heartbeat. So this is to the visual representation of the word. Now, for those diagnosed with dyslexia, you can see the scan on the right. The fMRI scans actually show that only the Broca's area tends to light up. And it's much bigger. It's being used much more than on the brain on the left. So essentially, the brain is stuck. It's trying to sort out words into their constituent parts without accessing either the parieto-temporal region or the word form area. So they're not accessing the meaning or the visual representation. Now that's interesting because, again, in the past, dyslexia was actually called word blindness. And from these brain scans, we can see that's exactly what's happening. The visual element of a word is not being processed and stored. And therefore, despite seeing the word numerous times, every time it's looked at, it appears to be a brand new word requiring decoding every single time. So the classic example are words like who or said. They might decode them, get it right on one page, and then completely fail to recognize it on the next. It's as if they haven't seen it before. And I think we've all been there and wondered how that's possible. So again, you might put a yes in your box to say, yep, you've definitely seen that happen, where a student has decoded it, been successful, has got the word, and maybe even on the next sentence, they've got it wrong. And you're just thinking, they've just seen that word, they've just got it, but they just don't seem to recognize it. So we were thinking, well, why don't we just change the labels instead? Instead of having a non-impaired and a dyslexic brain, how about this is a brain that is reading fluently, and this is someone who's not a fluent reader. So these are the two brains. And when we think about it that way, we can start to see that actually what we need to do is activate the parts of the brain that are not being used for fluent reading. So Paula, over to you.
Yeah, so we're going to go a little bit more deeply into why phonics isn't the whole solution. So we've got a diagram here which represents those three parts of the brain. So we've got the sound of the word. So you need to use your ability to hear those sounds, and that's found in the phonological loop inside the brain. We also have the visual representation of the whole word, and in your brain you have a visual cache, the part of the brain that deals with mental imagery and recall. And then, of course, we also need the meaning of the word. And that's the meaning of the word in terms of its semantics, its context in the text. So with these three parts, synthetic phonics, as you can see, actually uses the phonological loop as the primary route in. So it's a very auditory base, sometimes some kinesthetic there, but it's primarily an auditory system, an auditory doorway into the brain. And now let's have a look at some of the hallmarks of dyslexia, and this explains why phonics is so difficult for people who've got dyslexia or dyslexia type symptoms. Now, students with reading and or spelling difficulties experience one or more of the following issues. They absolutely have challenges with segmenting and blending. And we've got new research from neuroscience to back that up. They might have also the inability to recall visual images of words. And in some cases, people have both difficulties, challenges with segmenting and blending, hearing the sounds, and also challenges in recalling the visual images of words. And you can also see often letter and word reversals beyond the age at which this is quite normal. And that means that even if the student is seeing the word, it isn't clear or stable in their mind's eye. Now, these same students also have, on the other hand, incredible strengths. They often have very high IQ. They display great talents and have many abilities in other areas of the curriculum. They tend to be big picture thinkers, creative problem solvers, global learners, and have highly developed visuospatial skills. They're the children who are great at design technology, art, science, but their academic performance in terms of their reading and their spelling just doesn't match this obvious intelligence. So what is going on here? Okay, now, we are all wired differently. And the term that is used now is neurodiversity. Neurodiversity, this term was coined in the 1990s. Initially, it was used around autism, but it's been extended to include everyone whose thinking processes appear to be different from what have been established as cultural norms. So the quote is, of the definition is, neurodiversity is the diversity of human brains and minds, the infinite variation in neurocognitive functioning within our species. It makes sense that we are all wired differently. Brains just function differently. There are no two people who really think the same way. So it follows on from that we need a diverse set of teaching tools that can cater for the neurodiversity we see in every classroom. And I think what is happening certainly recently in the UK is that we are all being funneled down the same route, and we're not catering for these different neurodiverse brains. So we see dyslexia actually not as a disability. Because there are many dyslexic people who are incredibly successful and incredibly talented. It is not a disability if you look at it in a different way. So we see dyslexia not as a learning disability, but rather as an expression of neurodiversity. It points to a discrepancy, in fact, between how a person is taught and how they learn. And then we see that these children are, and students are not learning disabled, but they're rather in need of an alternative approach that matches their strengths.
So yeah, absolutely. That's the strengths-based model is basically what this is about. It is about focusing on the fact that there are things that people can do really, really well. And of course, everyone has a weakness or a deficit somewhere, but we have a choice. We can either focus on the deficits or we can focus on the strengths. So the deficit model, which is the one on the left, obviously, is it's the one that's used in most education systems. It's looking at where are the weaknesses or deficits that a student is exhibiting, and you identify what they are, and then the idea is that obviously you focus on those in order to bring them up, and so they can hopefully catch up with their peers. And those who've been identified as having, and we're going to put it in quotation marks because it's not a term that we particularly like to use, but a phonological deficit, this difficulty with segmenting and blending, the answer is generally more phonics, to take people out of class, to work slower in smaller groups or one-to-one, so that hopefully they can actually catch up then with their peers. But it reminds us of the definition of insanity, that thing of doing the same thing over and over again and yet expecting a completely different result. And for a lot of these people, it's like pushing a huge boulder up a hill. At primary school, it's difficult enough, but at least there tends to be a lot more support in place for children at primary school. But then get into secondary school and those weaknesses and deficits still haven't been overcome, it becomes a whole different ballgame, because now you have organizational skills, all kinds of difficulties added into the mix. Now, the aim is to have learning success, is to be able to help people learn successfully and to be able to unlock their learning potential. The strengths-based model looks at what students are really good at. If someone's already good at something, they already have those pathways in the brain very, very well developed. So if you can piggyback onto those pathways, then actually what we're doing is making learning a much easier process. Now, we know that with dyslexia, that the visual spatial part of the brain is very, very well developed. And so we use this as the starting point. Once a student knows how to learn in a way that best suits them, learning generally becomes much more easy and enjoyable. So they actually want to learn because it's not a big struggle and they're not always failing. They actually start to get success very quickly with our process. And it really does improve things very, very quickly. Now, any of you who are familiar with Carol Dweck's work, Mindsets, the book is called Mindsets, we've actually used this growth mindset as the basis for our core beliefs. So these are that everybody can learn, provided they're shown the right strategy for them. That there is no one size fits all. That when someone knows what's right for them and it works and they get the same outcome, they can spell and read, they're just doing it in a different route, then it works. That IQ and abilities are not fixed at birth. You're not given a quota when you're born, but actually this can change and grow over time. And again, it's all down to strategies. And we now know that the brain is incredibly plastic. So this neuroplasticity, it means that the brain has enormous capacity for developing new and effective pathways if one way doesn't work. In the past, it used to be that if one part of your brain isn't working, it was like a machine. Well, then that was it. There was nothing you can do about it. But we do know that the brain actually is capable of rerouting, rewiring, and able to actually use a completely different pathway. But if you're using one that already is really well developed, then the brain doesn't have to go through that whole process of really expending a lot of energy to try to develop a brand new system. So this whole kind of rewiring of the brain is not necessary. Our brains are absolutely incredible, and we just have to know how to tap into them to unleash learning potential. So if we go back to our diagram, this is a simple representation of what's going on inside the brain. So these are the 3 areas necessary for fluent reading. We know we need the sounds of the word. We know we need the visual representation of the whole word. And we know we need the meaning of the word. If we go through the visual part of the brain, then actually we're still going to end up in the same place, which is that all 3 are being used. But instead of it predominantly being the auditory part of the brain, we're actually going to go in through the visual part of the brain. So let's have a look at how we would actually do that in our system. So we have 2 main elements to the jump-starting process. The first element is about creating a stress-free, effective learning state. That's not just for the student, that's also for the teacher, by the way. So we're going to show you how to do that. And the second part is to be able to help the student learn how to use their own internal mental imagery skills effectively for spelling and reading. Now, we know that a lot of systems have a visual element in terms of what's being shown to them, but that's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about visual teaching and visual aids. We're talking about internally, inside the mind's eye, what is the student doing? Now, we're going to give you an overview here of the 5 stages in a moment, but just so you know, the full training does take 14 hours, so we've had to condense it and really speed it up to give you what we can in this hour. And over the course, we do actually tell you how to implement it in your classroom as well. So if we just focus, first of all, on the getting rid of stress element. Here's again, this is from neuroscience. So this was This was something I came across when I was doing my master's research, and it really was a massive, massive light bulb moment for me. So the current model of memory is that we have two parts that we're using when we're learning. We have a working memory. Well, actually, we have some three. We have a short-term memory, a working memory, and a long-term memory. The short-term memory, don't worry too much about. It's just what you're using right now to keep track of what's happening, but it's not at the forefront of your mind. It's just keeping track of, well, what have we been saying? What might be coming up next? It's just helping to know that whatever you're thinking about right now, where does it fit into the whole thing? But the working memory is the key one that we use when we're learning something new. And then we have our long-term memory, which is obviously where we store it for when we need it later on. We don't need everything right here, right now. Now, information passes from the working memory to the long-term memory and vice versa, back and forth via an area of the brain called the hippocampus. And the hippocampus is now being nicknamed the learning organ. And that's because it is they know how important that part of the brain is with regards to transferring memory, events, information, things like that, back and forth between the working memory, what you're paying attention to right now, and your long-term memory, where are you going to keep it for when you need it. Now, when we get stressed, though, we have a neurotransmitter called cortisol. It's the stress hormone. And when we get stressed and cortisol levels rise, what can actually happen is that the dendrites, the little neurological connections inside the hippocampus, can actually wither and pull back. So essentially what's happening is that the memory, the information transferring between working memory and long-term memory actually is shut down. Now, if any of you have ever had that experience of freezing in an exam or an interview or some other important event in your life where your mind just seems to have the barrier just comes down, everything just, boom, can't remember anything, this is actually why. And I had actually my own quite extreme experience of this when I did my A-levels. I studied A-levels in the UK. And I know my very first paper I went into, I'm originally an engineer, just a little bit of background about me there, but physics was one of my best subjects. And I went in, first paper, totally stressed out, totally worried, really panicking about A-levels, and opened the paper and thought, oh, wow, I think they're doing it in ancient Greek this year, because it just didn't seem to make any sense to me. And I knew the information, I just couldn't get it out. And I know when I came out of that exam and I knew for sure I'd failed, I was in shock because I couldn't understand what had happened. I'd done all this extra work, I had studied so hard, and yet there I was at the crunch point and nothing was happening. So once the stress levels are high enough, actually nothing goes in and nothing comes out. So for us, reducing stress levels is absolutely vital, and it's a crucial first step for students before we go anywhere near words to be able to help them get into a much more effective state. And some of you right here on the webinar might be getting stressed about how we're going to do this and where's the information, what am I going to learn, and you might be getting yourselves into an ineffective state for learning. So in order to take you through the process and give you an experience of it, I'm going to hand you over to Paula.
Hi, thank you. Yes, so getting into an effective learning state. Yes, a lot of children, we see it on a daily basis, are very, very stressed about their lives, let alone their learning. Now, we don't mean horizontal when we're talking about being stress-free. We don't want students to go off into trance mode. What we are wanting to develop is a state in which you have a relaxed body, but your mind is alert and open. And we use a process called grounding. There are other things that I know that we're using in schools, such as mindfulness and so on. But the grounding technique is, I think, one of the fastest and most effective ways that I've come across. Now, the process not only helps you to overcome some of the stress that you're feeling within your mind-body system, but once grounded, this actually helps students control their mental imagery. It stops the words moving around for them. Now, try this out for yourself a few times, and then when you feel comfortable with it, you can have a go with your students. So I'm going to talk you through it now. So it's going to be time to just relax a little bit, take a little bit of time out now. So you can close your eyes for this if you would like to, or keep them open if it feels more comfortable. And just take a couple of deep breaths now. Okay. That's right. Okay. Maybe another deep breath. Good. Now then, just notice your normal breathing pattern for a few breaths. Just think where the breath is in your body. Okay, now we're going to start to establish a rhythm. We're going to go in for 3 and out for 3 in your own time. Good. Now, just as you breathe gently, easily and normally, I'd like you to put your attention to the top of your head. And then just take your attention down through your head, your neck, your shoulders, your chest, your arms are beginning to feel heavy in the chair, and your tummy and your hips and your legs, knees, calves, down to your feet. So all your attention is going to be on your feet. You can feel your toes against the floor, your heels against the floor, and feel the pressure of the ground underneath your feet, supporting you. Okay. And now we're going to take a deep breath in. And as you breathe out, I'd like you to imagine that from the soles of your feet, you're going to send down and out long and wide roots, just like a tallest tree sends down its roots deep through the earth's surface, deep, deep down to the center of the earth. And those roots are spreading far and wide and deep. And now, when you breathe in next, we're going to imagine that you're going to breathe in energy from the earth's core. Energy is going to come up through your feet into your body. You can imagine a color or a form, or just if you're not visualizing anything, just imagine that it's happening. Just think that it's happening. Okay, and as you breathe in, the energy comes up. Good, coming right through your body, through your roots, up into your body. That's good. And now we're going to imagine we've got some down roots. I like to imagine them at the back of my body, but you can imagine them wherever you like. And as we breathe in with the fresh energy, it comes up through your body, and then through our down roots, we're going to send any tensions, stresses, unwanted thoughts, feelings, and so on. So I'm going to set up that loop now, breathing in. Good. And out. Just relax those thoughts. Good. Just relaxing and releasing those thoughts and feelings that you don't want anymore back down into the ground for the energy to be recycled. Good. Okay. Good. Now just gently twiddle your fingers and your toes. When you feel ready, if you've got your eyes closed, you can now open them. So what do you notice in your body now? Notice any difference? Okay. Now some children find this a really lovely, relaxing experience. For others, it's a bit strange and it takes some getting used to. So again, practice and introducing it slowly will be really useful. So once the children feel comfortable doing it, standing up is the best way to start, in fact, and then you can practice it sitting down. So that is stage 1 of the process. So working to really understand how your body is feeling and operating at a given moment in time, and being able to get into a relaxed, optimal learning state. So moving on to stage 2 now.
I'm just going to jump in for a second.
Sorry, yeah, sure, Sarah.
And just to mention that the pilot school that
yes,
this was introduced to, oh gosh, nearly over 5, this is their 5th year of using it. They saw immediate results. They actually used the grounding technique across the entire school, every class, and within the first day of teaching these children how to get into an effective learning state, they could feel the difference within the whole school. In fact, if you go, and they use this throughout the day, so they do a longer grounding technique in the morning just to get everybody present and into their bodies and into the classroom and ready to learn. And then throughout the day, because the kids now know actually how to get grounded, all they need to do is say, okay, we're changing subjects, get yourselves grounded. And the children know how to do this automatically. And they even use it outside of school. Things like piano exams, football matches, taekwondo tests, grading, whatever it is they're actually going to do outside of school, they know that this state is not just for learning, it's actually for being really present and being as effective as possible. So Shay always says to all the we teach courses at Shay School as an open course for teachers to come along to in Ireland. And he always says the same thing. He says, if you don't get anything else out of this course other than this, then you're over 50% of the way there with a lot of students, because stress can be the major factor why a lot of students are not learning. And doing a big long technique of 20 minutes sometimes of things like the mindfulness and the meditation, which are brilliant, but they just don't have time. This works incredibly fast. And within 30 seconds to a minute, you can have the entire room. Everyone's ready to learn. Everyone's grounded. It's quite amazing to watch 7 and 8 year olds doing this, because once they know how to do it, they just know how to do it. So sorry, I just had to jump in there.
Oh no, that's great. That's right.
We move on to stage 2.
Yes, thanks, Sarah. So stage 2 is investigating, and we're kind of like a forensic brain investigators here, where we investigate mental imagery, the mental imagery that the students have at present, and then we help them to develop and control that. And the only way to find out what is happening inside a particular brain is to ask questions, and we've developed some discovery questions to find out what's actually happening inside another brain. So let's have a go, shall we? This is another practical exercise for you. So I'm going to say a word to you, and I want you to just pay attention to what's happening inside your mind when I say the word. What sounds are you getting, any pictures that you're getting, and just anything that you notice inside your mind when you hear it. So if I was to say to you cat, what do you think of? What comes to mind? Well, you might be thinking of your own cat, or a real cat, a box of kittens maybe, or even a tiger, a lion, a cartoon cat. Maybe you actually see the actual word cat, the letters of it, or you might even think about 1,000 cats on the island climbing all over the place. Or you might not have seen anything, just maybe have a vague sense of catness, if you like. So what happened for you? And if you can, just type a few notes into the chat box to think, what did you see? What happened for you? Were you seeing it in colour, in black and white? Was it the big, frightening? What was happening for you? Let's give a few moments for some comments to come. But hopefully you've seen from your simple exercise that everyone does think differently. Even though I said just one, oh, here's Amber, so a black cat curled up in a white space, and then a ginger cartoon cat. So lots of different ideas, absolutely. And it's image of cat, yeah, in colour, and the black and white cat sleeping on a chair. Wonderful. So we've got lots of ideas coming there. So from this very simple exercise, everyone thinks differently and sees things differently inside their mind's eye. So imagine, what's happening with your students, and very often we say things, and I know I, as a teacher, I didn't really say, okay, so if I ask you to imagine something, what actually are you seeing? What is happening inside your mind's eye? For some students, their images move all over the place, or they have multiple images and screens inside their mind's eye. And so before moving on to use mental imagery for words, we first have to help students control their mental images, and getting into that optimal state, the grounding state, that really helps them to control any imagery that is out of control. So moving on to stage 3, and at stage 3 we focus on spelling concrete nouns. I know a lot of programs start with simply sort of disembodied sounds, if you like, but we say please start with concrete nouns. And the reason for that is that the student can easily think of an image associated with that noun. So let's have a look at our favourite diagram again. where we've got the meaning of the word and the sound of the word. Now we are going in, as Sarah said before, we are going in through the visual cache, through the visual pathway, if you like. Now that's already developed because we can all, well, the vast majority of people can actually recall images of themselves, their loved ones, maybe their, children, their lunch boxes, their favorite cartoon, a video that they've seen. They can actually see things in their mind's eye. Now, interestingly, as Sarah also said, there is no specific part of the brain that's for reading and for spelling. We use the bit of the brain that early humans used for recognizing objects. So you needed to be able to recognize your own cave or recognize what a mammoth looked like. And we use that part of the brain actually for storing our words. So what we do, and this is the genius that Olive Hickmott came up with, which was that if we can see an image, say, of a cat, as you did, your black and white cat, well then, if we can see words in the same way that we see images, then we can actually begin to see words in our mind's eye. And this is the skill that is missing for students who are struggling, particularly with their segmenting and blending and their phonics. So another little practical exercise for you. So I'm going to show you how we will do this. So can you just think of a dog, please? You've got one? And make sure it's only one dog and that it's still and easy to see if you can. Now, what I'd like you to do is to put the letters for dog, the D-O-G, onto the dog's body, not below the dog, not above the dog or to the side, but actually on the image. And then check in your mind's eye, can you see the letters and the image together as one? Okay, now when we do this with students, obviously, they're not imagining the word because they might not be able to spell it. We show them the word on a post-it or flashcard or a piece card or something. And then what's happening is that then the student then recalls the combined image of the picture and the word together. And this is what we don't do. We tend to have the word either, on the back of the flashcard or above, below, whatever. But by combining it, we can then take it into that visual word form area in the same place that we store pictures of objects. And so this is training the brain to see whole words as images, as pictures that can be recalled and recognized really easily. Okay, so stage 4 is when we move on to see other words. And I know, I'm sure you're going to say, yes, but what about other words like once and again and things where we can't form an image. So we only use the image to jumpstart, if you like, to that visual word form area. And once that strategy for learning words has been mastered, then any word can be learnt. So what we do is ask them to take the picture away. So we would be asking for the dog to walk away, leaving the actual letters for dog there in the mind's eye. And boy, we find this is really essential for high frequency words, because once they can see the word in the mind's eye, then they can learn it and they can recall it. Homophones, oh my goodness, you need to have a visual system or process for learning homophones, because otherwise, how do you do the difference between C and C or there and there, unless you can actually have a visual representation of the word in your mind's eye? So stage 5 is all about consolidation. Now, we do see students go through stages 1 to 4 within a shorter period as maybe even an hour and a half, particularly those kind of what we would term the classic dyslexics, who are high intelligence, really articulate, really, good at learning in many other areas, but they've just got this, I have to say, got the problem with the reading and the spelling. And once they've understood the process, those stages don't need to be repeated, but they do need to practice learning their spellings visually. And we recommend about 5 to 10 minutes a day and about 4 or 5 words. And in a class, we go more into this in the full course, obviously, the children can either do this themselves to learn their spellings, or in pairs, or perhaps with a learning support teacher if they have one. And like any skill, practice is absolutely key to making this automatic and unconscious. And then once this becomes an unconscious process, we can free the working memory to deal with other tasks. Now we see this happening around about the 4-week mark, which is pretty quick considering how long some of the students have struggled for. Okay, and so once the students have mastered the process of seeing words in their mind's eye, well then you can continue with your normal phonics program. Absolutely. But as you're going through your phonics program, what we need to do is to ensure that you link the visual element to the phonological and the auditory pathway. And you can do this by checking with your children what are they seeing inside their mind's eye. So we've talked a lot about spelling. Well, that's because we actually see that successful spelling leads to fluent reading. We teach both spelling and reading simultaneously, because as the students' word bank increases through learning how to spell the word, so does their vocabulary and their fluency. Then they can recognize that word again in their books. Now, so reading, of course, is not only about decoding. We're not just barking at print. It's about making meaning of and remembering what we're reading. And we know that the most effective way to do that is to use mental imagery too. So all this work on developing and controlling mental imagery is going to help all sorts of reading activities. So what outcomes do we see? Well, obviously we see improved success in spelling, we see more fluent reading and enjoyment of reading. I think most importantly is that we actually see greater confidence and self-belief as they now know how to learn. And it's amazing how many students say to me, you know, I just thought I was so stupid. And so many students just go through their school days thinking, they're so stupid and there's something wrong with them. Why can't I master this, that I see all these other people who are not quite so bright as me, that they can get it? And so they get a great self-confidence boost because they know how to learn, that there's nothing wrong with them. And then we can start developing them as independent learners with greater motivation. Okay, well that was a brief run through, very, very fast. We're almost at the top of the hour, so I'm going to hand over to Sarah now.
Thanks, Paula, and apologies for the slides jumping around there.
Apologies for jumping around myself.
that hour went by so fast. I
really
hope that you enjoyed it. I felt like we were speeding up our voices
yes,
to squeeze as much information as possible. And as Paula said, we really hope that we've given you some new insights into the minds of your struggling students and what can be done to really help them. So we are going to stay online for another 30 minutes or so. And if you've got any questions, this is an opportunity to stick the questions in. We're also going to talk about the outline of our new online course for educators that we are launching in September. And of course, if you stay to the end, like any webinar, there's always an amazing offer. On our course, we are going to go into a lot more depth in terms of the learning, the neuroscience of learning. We go through each stage in a lot more depth, things like that. And we move on to more in detail around reading, handwriting, and things like that. Now, if you can't stay and or you've had enough, you are always welcome to contact us. You will get an email following this webinar to say thanks for attending, and it'll give you an opportunity to email back with any questions. And we will put any questions and answers that we discuss over the next half hour or so on an email as well, to give you anything that you missed. Our website is jumpstartinglearningskills.com. And we also have a Facebook page where we post lots of articles and little videos and things like that. So you're welcome to join us there. That's free to join. So thank you for being with us today. We hope you've enjoyed it. And we're going to move on now to the Q&A section. So we're now open for questions. So if you have a question, please stick it into the chat box. And we will see what you'd like to know. Perhaps you can also give us a little bit of feedback of what you just found in terms of even just those simple exercises, the grounding, thinking about your own mental imagery, thinking about your own spelling strategies, and really in particular thinking about the role that mental imagery plays in your own learning, not just the learning of your students. Let me give a couple of minutes there. If there are no questions, then that's absolutely fine. We can continue, and we will give a little bit of detail in terms of what the online course is going to entail. If any questions come up in the meantime, please feel free to ask them. We're available now. So we've got, it's a 7-week course delivered via weekly live webinars. It starts on Thursday 20th, and that's 7 p.m. GMT. And it's the first one will be 2 hours, and what that will give is half an hour of that will be introducing yourself, a little bit of background about you, what you're looking for. So we are teaching this as a live class. This is not going to be recorded. They are recorded though, so that you do have access to them afterwards. So if you can't make that particular one, we make sure that you do have the information. Now, the aim of this is very much that it is a practical course. It's something that it's not just about theory that then you have to try and figure out, okay, how am I going to work with my students? We are going to give you the tools for, yes, working one-to-one, but also how you can actually apply that in your classroom alongside your phonics program that you're using. Because again, we're not asking you to throw that out, we are asking you to actually integrate this in. So here's a question just come up here. So when you showed us the visual of the dog and then attached the word dog, how do children move on to words that have no visual imagery? Okay. That's okay. So Paula, I'll pass over to you.
Okay, so what we would, obviously this takes a little bit more time than just immediately. So once you've established that the child can see the dog clearly and it's stable, it's there, and then once you've established that they can see the letters DOG on the dog, then they would practice with several words, concrete nouns, moving to slightly longer ones, so they could do elephant and dolphin, for example. Then what you do when you're absolutely sure that they can see letters in their mind's eye, then I would ask them, I would say, okay, so now when I say what's going to happen, you're going to move your dog away either quickly or slowly, however you like, leaving the letters behind. So we're going to end up with the letters left behind and the dog moving out of the picture. Okay, are you ready? And move your dog. So then they create like a spelling wall. I get them to choose a name for it. You know, they have a spelling wall or a whiteboard or a spelling board or whatever they want to do. They've got their beautiful, clean space ready to see any word in their mind's eye. Thank you for that question. That's really good. Thank you. I did rush a little bit at the end there.
And Amber has a question there too.
Lucy, oh, does it make a difference if letters are in lowercase or capitals? That's a really interesting question, Lucy. Yes, because a lot of people with dyslexia or with spelling difficulties prefer to use capitals, and that's because the lines of symmetry are different, so you can actually see the capital letters much more easily in a way, and you can hold them steady without sort of flipping them around, you know, like you get the B's and the P's and the Q's and the D's all kind of jumbling around. The capital letters are more easy to recognize. But of course, you know, we're in the real world and we want them to recognize, you know, uppercase and lowercase as appropriate. And so we tend to use the lowercase because that's how we want the children to be learning them to write them in their written work. And one of the amazing things is how this process can help handwriting, but we certainly haven't got time to go into that today. But I actually use a cursive script for them, so that they're going to imagine the word in their mind's eye in a cursive script, and that really has an amazing effect on their handwriting. But more of that on the long course.
And there's a question there above Lucy's from Amber.
Okay. Oh, I didn't see that from Amber. Can you read?
Yeah, she says, thank you so much for this. It's been really interesting. Thanks, Amber. I work in FS2. I'm hoping to use some of these techniques. And how would you introduce this when so many of the children are only identifying symbols and pictures?
Sorry, okay, only identifying symbols
and pictures.
So many of the children are only identifying symbols and pictures. So are you getting that? Sorry, I'm not quite, Amber.
I'm not 100% sure either. Do you mean that it's just symbols, things like McDonald's signs, things that they recognize outside, and just pictures? Yes, she says, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So what we know is that obviously if they're not recognizing words, they haven't actually taken a picture of the word. They don't. The reason why we know that phonics does work is that actually everybody eventually moves into visual recognition. We've seen this from neuroscience that fluent readers and proficient spellers actually end up storing the picture of the word as opposed to meaning, actually inside the visual center of the brain. So what is obviously not happening for those children who are struggling is they're not actually they're not recognizing the word is an image. They keep trying to just simply sound it out. So our whole process is about, number one, getting them to bring up the pictures because they can recognize symbols and pictures, and then put the words on it, so it becomes like a whole packet of information for that child. So they actually see the word in the picture, and eventually the image goes and they keep the word and they see it as a whole. The word itself becomes an image.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Sarah.
No, go on.
Yeah, and Amber, actually, that's really interesting that you brought that up, because some children, when you ask them, can they see their lunchbox or something, they go, no, can't do anything. No, I can't see anything in my mind's eye. There's a whole spectrum from not being able to see anything to seeing kind of multiple images and screens, as we said. And so for some children, the only thing that they can see in their mind's eye, it's a good place to start, actually. Well, how do you know that there's a McDonald's there? And they can actually see that McDonald's sign. It's a bit scary, but still. And so that's the place where we would start. So we would start to work on how they see those symbols and then gradually introduce familiar objects to them. So that's what it's all about, is developing, understanding the child's mental imagery at the moment, and then beginning to develop it in slow steps. And of course, that's what we go into in the full course. I saw another question popping up there.
Yeah, this is from Lucy. Yep, so Lucy, so hopefully, Amber, that's answered your question. So Lucy says, to learn this mental imagery strategy, it's crucial to be able to name each letter in the alphabet. Some phonics trained children only identify the letters using phonic sound.
Oh, absolutely. That's my pet.
Our pet hate, yeah.
That's my pet subject when I train in schools. Because you're so right. I don't understand. Well, I do understand how it's happened that they're still going on. Like, even in, you're teaching year 6 and they're going "Kaha a for chair," and it just sends me into, because certainly I know the UK scheme, the letters and sounds, and in the UK government guidance, actually on page 15, it clearly says that when you move away from one letter, one sound correspondence, your CVC words, like that, once you move away from that, then you need to introduce the letter names, because that really helps the children, because otherwise, they're trying to process the sound said, and then their immediate reaction is go d, and then they've got to go d, somehow makes said, which is really difficult. So training them into how to see the letter names and the sounds is I think very, very important.
Well, and also it's that link again between spelling and reading, which is that actually for reading, the letter sounds, obviously, yes, it works up to a certain extent, but certainly for spelling, if you don't know the names of the letters, it becomes very, very difficult, because there are so many ways of making that sound in the English language with different letters. So you have to know the specific one, not just the sound that it makes. And actually in the books, gosh, name's just gone out of my head, Language at the Speed of Sight.
I've actually got it on my bookshelf here.
Yeah, and he actually says that without the letter names, a person doesn't know the category that sound belongs to. So the letter name is sort of, it's the category, and all the sounds that letter can make, or maybe doesn't make if it's silent, sit underneath that. So the brain loves connections. This is the thing about neuroscience. The brain, we know that the more connections the brain can make between things, the quicker and easier it is to access it. So actually the letter names are incredibly important, because it's a very fast way of going, oh yeah, I know that letter and I know its job. So it really is crucial. Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes I have had teachers say to me, oh, but we don't want to overload the children. We don't want to teach them too much at the same time. And I'm thinking, well, having been I am a mum, and having my children gone through very early stages of learning, I know that when they were 2, I could show them a picture of a cat, and I would say, what's that? And they would say cat, and I'd say, what sound does it make? It says meow. So it knows the name and it knows the sound. Children can absolutely learn huge amounts of information, but it's actually the connections that are much more important than just these sounds that are disembodied, as you said earlier. So I hope, Lucy, that That answers, and Amber said, yep, she answers. We answered her question earlier too. Any other questions from everyone's still pretty much still here? It's fantastic. You're all still, you're still with us. It's how wonderful, unless you've just left the computer running. So if there are any other questions, nothing's coming up at the moment. Okay, I will just carry on here. So on the course, as I said before, we actually go really in depth in terms of the neuroscience behind learning. So we really get into, because although I've just talked a little bit there about the working memory, short-term memory, long-term memory, and the hippocampus, we actually have a lot more going on. We just didn't have time to go into all of that today. And we actually do a lot in terms of, even self-talk, the effect internal dialogue has in terms of learning and paying attention. But we do a huge amount in terms of children's self-confidence and self-belief, because that will really impact, again, their kind of anxiety levels and stress levels. So we will teach you an awful lot about that. And we go through every single stage of the spelling process in absolute depth, of course, so that you can really understand why each stage is where it is and what you can do to help children, and not just one-to-one, in a group setting. Because the school that this was piloted at, they use this in every class, mainstream. This is not just used as a remedial, or, as an intervention. So we then go into reading, and not just about building up the word bank, actually some other little tips and tricks that really can improve reading quite dramatically. Again, as we said, certainly when we work one-to-one with our clients, within an hour and a half, we can see children going from being completely confused and baffled about spelling to being able to spell 8, 9-letter words. They can see it inside their mind's eye. They can read it as well. And we can then move on to reading, and we can actually see them immediately start to say, okay, I can see this connection with what's on the page. This is a word, but it actually means something, and transferring that into the mental imagery process of making sense of what they're reading and reading comprehension. And we move into things like handwriting, copying from the board, and we're also going to give an introduction of how mental imagery actually helps with maths. If you think about mental arithmetic, mental imagery is the key. But again, a lot of students, regardless of how brilliant the process is that you might be using to teach them, they're not getting it, and it's because of what they're doing inside their mind's eye, as opposed to what you're not doing externally. So this is a really key element of knowing the difference between teaching and learning. We're also going to be including group coaching on the course. So at every webinar, there will be an hour and a half of teaching and half an hour of what we're doing here, answering questions. You might have emailed a question in beforehand, and we'll answer it in that session. Or you might have a question that comes up throughout it, and we'll answer it at the end. But we always give the opportunity for people to answer. Sorry, just something else has just come in here. So this is from Claire, I think. Thank you for a very interesting webinar. You're welcome. Work with an SEN school and use lots of visuals to help the children process and develop their learning. Although I might take time for my class to work through the stages, this is a very suitable approach. Thank you, Claire. Yeah, absolutely. It is about, as we said, we're not asking you to throw anything out, because there are some amazing visual tools. That it's just this tiny little gap that a lot of students are not doing. They're not actually using their own internal mental imagery to actually process information and then store it and be able to recall it. And it's a lot of it is stress related, or it's just simply they just didn't know that was what they were supposed to do. So thank you. So I'm not sure if there are any other comments or questions. Because of the interactive nature of the online course, spaces are very limited. We're actually limiting it to 30 people. Now, this is the first of 2 webinars that we are running today. So we have a lot more people coming on to the evening webinar, obviously, because schools are back here in Ireland, and just time differences around the world as well. So we are giving until tomorrow night to actually sign up if you want to with this particular offer. Okay, so the fee is normally $497 per person, so that's for the whole 2 months. It includes the course material, the webinars, the recordings, group coaching support all the way through. But of course, it wouldn't be a webinar without a special offer. And we're going to offer you that plus an additional bonus, actually, of 6 months group coaching after the course is finished. So that will essentially take you to the end of the academic year if you're September to June, July, as we are here this side of the world. And that is normally €40 a month for group coaching. So we're giving you 6 months to the value of $240. So we are offering both the course and the additional 6 months of coaching for only €247. We really want to make sure that this is available to as many people as possible. It's being used to help as many children around the world. We see it working on a daily basis. We have people that we've trained and they come back to us with some fantastic success stories. A lot of those you can actually see on our website. There's an interview with Shay, who's the Shivakarthi, the principal of the school that this was piloted at. And he is such a huge advocate of this. They have 240 students in his school, and they use it across the whole board, not just even for English, but they also use it for Irish. So this actually works in any language, unlike other systems that are specific to that language and the way that that language is spoken. So there's an interview with him. There's testimonials from teachers who've done the live training and what it has done for them. But obviously, we wanted to reach more and more people around the world to really have this impact even more children in a really positive way. So if you're interested and you're going to sign up, which we really, really hope that you do. If you've enjoyed an hour of this, imagine 14 hours and how much you get and how much information. And we're always so excited to be working with people. Is you can just simply go to our website. There you'll see an online section in the menu. Click on that. You'll see the Jumpstarting Online course for educators. You use this promo code. That promo code will only work until the end of tomorrow. So midnight tomorrow, that code will no longer work, and there's only 30 places anyway on the whole course. So if all 30 places go at this price, then they're gone. That's it. We will be running it again, but it won't be until next year sometime. So because of the interactive nature, we want to make sure we really support everybody on their journey. So although we allocated half an hour, we're kind of at a 20-minute point. We've still got another few more minutes. If there's any other questions, please do feel free. You can ask them now. And if there isn't, we just really thank you for being here today. Again, it's such an honor to be able to share this information with educators around the world. And we look forward to working with you.